Imagine misplacing your keys and feeling that spark of panic. Now scale that feeling until it could purchase a private island, bankroll a space mission, or fund an entire hospital wing. That is the voltage of this countdown. Real, high-value objects, machines, vehicles, and weapons worth hundreds of millions, sometimes billions, that slipped through human fingers. Some were stolen, some were swallowed by oceans, and some simply stepped into the fog and never returned. No folklore, no myths, only documented disappearances that still haunt investigators, families, and entire industries. Two of the most staggering losses bookend a modern truth. Even with satellites, sonar, and global networks, the world is still big enough to hide very large, very expensive things. #10. Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370, estimated value, $350 million. March 8, 2014. A routine red-eye becomes the century's most unsettling aviation question. Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370, Boeing 777-200E, are built for long routes and redundant safety. Lifts off from Kuala Lumpur bound for Beijing with 239 people aboard. Less than an hour later, civilian radar loses it. Military scopes suggest a hard turn and a westward track that continues for hours. Then the trail dissolves into open water. No distress call, no emergency code, no coordinates, only absence. The search becomes a planetary task. More than 24 nations exchange radar tapes, satellite metadata, and ocean current models. Oceanographic vessels tow kilometer-long sonar arrays across violent seas. Autonomous underwater vehicles sweep the seabed like methodical beetles, tracing arcs across abyssal plains. Over 100,000 square kilometers of ocean floor are scanned, and the bill climbs past $200 million. The tangible result is meager. A handful of barnacle-studded fragments wash ashore on remote Indian Ocean beaches. Eerie evidence without a finished narrative. Theories multiply because evidence refuses to. A cockpit fire that killed the radios but not the airplane. A deliberate diversion by a human hand. A hijacking that made no demands. Sudden decompression that left the jet flying on like a ghost until the fuel ran dry. Solves one corner of the puzzle and collapses under another. Without recorders and without the main wreck, the story lives in models and probabilities, not in certainties. Beyond the price tag of the airframe, MH370 is an X-ray of confidence. We built a sky of radar, a web of satellites, and timetables stitched to the minute. Then watched a flagship aircraft slip through the gaps like a coin between floorboards. Families have no grave to visit. Investigators have no final page with a neat transcript. Regulators rewrote tracking rules. Airlines added layers of reporting. Still, the core truth waits somewhere under miles of water with the engines, the wings, and the answers. 9. The Soviet submarine K-129, estimated value $1 billion, including nuclear warheads. Rewind to 1968, when oceans were a chessboard and silence was strategy. The Soviet ballistic missile submarine. K-129 sails into the North Pacific with 98 men and 3 nuclear-tipped missiles. A steel capsule engineered to vanish on purpose. Then the boat misses a scheduled transmission. Then another. The Soviet Navy fans out like a comb through a hayfield and finds nothing but horizon.
The United States.
Here's what eyes cannot see. Hydrophones anchored to the seafloor part of a classified acoustic network pick up a violent signature northwest of Hawaii. The sound of a pressure hull crushed by the deep. Analysts triangulate a coordinate not to politics but to physics. A wreck more than 16,000 feet down. The light dies, and even Alloy learns humility. What follows feels like fiction. Under a cover story about mining the seafloor, an enormous ship takes shape. Billionaire Howard Hughes lends his name. The CIA supplies the purpose. Beneath decks, engineers build a mechanical grasp with steel fingers big as rooms, designed to bite the muck and lift a submarine that weighs like a small skyscraper. The project burns money like rocket fuel, hundreds of millions in 1970s dollars, and devours secrecy. Crews rehearse. Lawyers draft public fictions. Technicians tune tolerances until the machine hums in its sleep. In 1974, the ship hovers over the target, lowers the jaw, and closes on the Soviet deadweight. For a moment, the impossible becomes routine. Hydraulics rise, the claw tightens. The boat inches toward daylight it has not seen since the day it died. Then physics reasserts its leverage. A section fractures. Most of the hull tears free and tumbles back into the black. What reaches the surface is only a portion enough for rumors, not enough for certainty. Were codes recovered? Warheads? Only a few people know, and they sign their knowledge to history rather than headlines. What remains is heavier than rumor. 2/3 of $1 billion strategic asset still sleeps on the seafloor. Its missiles aging in slow motion, its crew sealed in a pressure-locked tomb. The families hear almost nothing official. The Soviets rage in private and posture in public. America mints a phrase. We can neither confirm nor deny that becomes the template whenever truth and secrecy collide. Strip away the spy novel varnish and the economic sting. Imagine spending the cost of a modern tower to lift a different kind of tower, only to watch gravity repossess the merchandise. Imagine writing the invoice for a mission that partly worked, yet left the most expensive pieces behind. Imagine knowing that 3 nuclear warheads almost made it to your deck and then did not. That is not just a loss. It is a lesson etched into the ledgers of 2 superpowers. The twin disappearances frame a rule we dislike but cannot ignore. Air can erase a flight path. Water can swallow a warship. Value, once tied to steel and fuel and codes, can evaporate into pure uncertainty. Accountants can total invoices, and insurers can price risk. Yet the universe keeps a ledger of its own. MH370 shows how a modern marvel can slip through a mesh meant to be inescapable. K2-129 shows how power can fall past the reach of its makers and remain there for generations. In both cases, the losses are more than numbers. They are wounds without closure, puzzles without a final piece, and reminders that control is a story we tell ourselves. Aviation rewrote rules, navies upgraded sensors, satellites sharpened their gaze, but uncertainty kept the last word. Stand on a beach at night and feel the wind coming off the water. Somewhere beyond that horizon, a fuselage rests in cold darkness. Somewhere below that same horizon, a submarine sleeps beneath a cathedral of pressure. Between them stretches a line that runs through families. Budgets, treaties, and textbooks, a quiet line labeled simply lost. Number 8. The Amber Room estimated value, $500 million. It began as a room made of light. Imagine 6 tons of fossilized resin amber cut, carved, polished, and set into gilded panels that glowed like honey under candle flame. In the early 1700s, Prussian craftsmen built this chamber to be a diplomatic showstopper. Later it was gifted to Russia and installed in the Catherine Palace near St. Petersburg, where it matured into legend. Mirrors framed with amber mosaics. Delicate intarsia reliefs. Mythic scenes that seemed to float behind warm translucence. Visitors swore the room didn't just reflect light. It generated it, turning anyone who stepped inside into a character from a fairy tale. And then a real war arrived to smash the illusion. In 1941, as Nazi Germany surged toward Leningrad, curators tried to pack the amber room away. Amber is brittle, and time is unkind. Panels cracked as workers pried them from the walls. In a last-minute compromise, they papered the surfaces and boxed what they could. German troops reached the palace anyway. Within days, the chamber was dismantled like an oversized puzzle. Packed into crates and shipped to Kingsburg, now Kaliningrad, where it went on display inside the city's castle museum. For a brief moment, the room lived a second life, a conquered trophy glowing under the wrong flag. Then the front shifted again, and certainty shattered. As the war turned against Germany, the crates reportedly moved. Some witnesses remembered trains, others whispered about cellars. Still others insisted the panels were hidden in mines or tunnels. In 1944-45, Allied bombs and a brutal siege pulverized Kingsburg. Fires ate archives. Roofs fell. If the room remained in the castle, it likely burned. If it had been moved, the trail died under rubble and ash. And so began one of the longest treasure hunts in modern history. Generations have searched. Caves, shafts, bunkers, lakes, even shipwrecks. Tip surface, then evaporate. In the 1990s, a single mosaic panel emerged in Germany and was traced to a wartime. The art handler, heartbreaking proof of life that answered nothing. Meanwhile, Russia spent decades rebuilding the room from photographs, drawings, and scraps of surviving documentation. The reconstruction opened in 2003 and instantly became a pilgrimage site. A perfect copy that aches precisely because it is a copy. How do you price a room like this? You do it imperfectly. You tally raw materials and artisan hours, factor cultural weight and black market appetite, and ask the hardest question of all. What would a nation pay to close an old wound? Converging estimates put the original around $500 million today, sometimes more. But even that number feels small compared with the soft power the room projected. Had it survived, it would be a museum's crown, and a billionaire's unattainable bauble in one, a postcard and a national myth. Instead, the most expensive glow on Earth is a silence, a missing chamber of light. Reduced to rumors, replicas, and the uneasy knowledge that beauty can be dismantled faster than it can be made. Number 7. The Patiala necklace estimated value, $600 to $700+ million, if intact today. Now imagine luxury so audacious it rewrites who is allowed to shine. In 1928, the Maharaja Bhupinder Singh of Patiala commissioned Cartier to create a necklace that would not merely glitter, but announce a kingdom. The result was a cascade that ran from collarbone to sternum, 5 chains deep, articulated in platinum, and paved with nearly 3,000 diamonds. At its heart burned the De Beers diamond, a 234.65-carat canary yellow cushion, one of the largest fancy stones ever cut. Around it hung graduated white diamonds, the size of almonds and Burmese rubies as red as lacquer. Each stone balanced to make the whole drape like liquid armor. Photographs of the Maharaja wearing the piece are almost surreal. This was men's jewelry, not as an accessory, but as a proclamation, where European craftsmanship bowed to Indian spectacle. And then, as empires receded and fortunes thinned, the necklace slipped out of sight. By 1948 it had vanished. There was no single scandal, no neat confession. The likeliest narrative is the quietest. Great jewels are often dismantled. Stones get lifted from their settings, sold one by one across decades, and vanish into rings, tiaras, and vaults. Their origins remembered only in footnotes. That seems to have happened here. By the late 20th century, the great yellow diamond reappeared in the auction world in a different setting. Famous, yet estranged. Its original context dissolved. Cartier went hunting too. In the 1990s, a company associate stumbled upon the skeletal remains of the necklace in a London vintage shop. The platinum framework with a handful of minor stones clinging to it. The heavy hitters were gone. The canary anchor, the big whites, the blood-warm rubies. Cartier bought the remnant and reconstructed the piece with replicas to preserve the silhouette. A historically informed ghost that shows the outline without the heartbeat. The original, intact and thunderous, remains missing. What would it be worth today? Start with the De Beers diamond. Modern analogs trade for sums that become headlines by themselves. Layer in multiple D2F color diamonds in the 20 to 30 carat range with old cut charm. Add top quality Burmese rubies in sizes that now set records whenever they surface. Multiply by provenance. A Maharaja's commission executed by Cartier at its interwar peak. Even conservatively, the intact necklace would command the sort of estimate normally reserved for royal collections. A museum-level masterpiece is hundreds of millions, with knowledgeable dealers whispering that a bidding war could easily push it higher. But the market valuation is only half the ledger. The Patiala was not a pendant. It was a performance. It documented a cross-current of taste and power. The moment when Indian princely grandeur met Parisian precision and made something neither could have made alone. Seeing it complete today would be like watching a lost scene from a vanished world, where ceremony, politics, and aesthetics fused at the neckline. That context is as missing as the stones themselves. There is a softer loss, too. The kind that never makes a catalog entry. The chain of hands broken when a masterpiece is split into sellable parts. Lapidaries forget the feel of those weights. Heirs lose a story to tell at dinners. Museums lose an anchor object that could stabilize a gallery and magnetize an audience. Cartier's reconstruction teaches the silhouette, the muscle memory of the piece, but the electricity the heavy, humming presence of a jewel made to command a court lives wherever those stolen lights now live. Perhaps that is why the Patiala haunts collectors as strongly as any missing painting. It is not only about value, it is about completeness. To recover the necklace would be to reassemble a sentence whose words were scattered across continents and decades. Until then, the richest sound it makes is the quiet one. A pause in history where a shout used to be. Number 6. The Merchant Royal El Dorado of the Seas estimated value. $1 to $1.5 billion. Still missing a storm, a leak, and a ledger that reads like fantasy. In September 1641, an English galleon called the Merchant Royal limped away from Spain's coast. Water sloshing in her hull and hope riding on her pumps. She was homeward bound for England after years of profitable trade. And crucially, she was reportedly carrying a colossal consignment of treasure, roughly 100,000 pounds of gold, hundreds of silver bars, and hundreds of thousands of coins destined for royal creditors. If even a conservative slice of those figures is right, the ship's hold was a floating central bank. Then the weather turned. Somewhere off Cornwall, near the Isles of Scilly, the pumps lost the race. The crew sighted another English ship and shouted for help. Within hours, the Merchant Royal rolled, sank, and apart from a handful of survivors, took everything with her straight into the cold green Atlantic. No battle, no pirates, no mutiny. Just weight, weather, and bad luck. The location should be simple. Off Land's End, said early accounts. But seas rearrange memory. Currents drag, charts lie, and the bottom here is a sprawled quilt of gullies and rock. For centuries, divers, salvers, and dreamers have hunted the wreck. Fishermen snag mystery metals in their nets. Beachcombers spin rumors. Sonar screens show teases that turn out to be geology. Professional outfits have made serious runs too. Towing magnetometers in tight grids, running side-scan mosaics, and crunching drift modeling against 17th century logs. They have found anchors, cannons, and ship bones that tell other stories but not the galleon nicknamed El Dorado of the Seas. Why does this one ship loom so large? Because unlike pirate chests and King's ransom myths, the Merchant Royal left a paper trail. Cargo tallies, court petitions, letters, clues in the ink of people who had money on the line. Translate the gold weight into modern ounces, mark to market the silver ad. Numismatic premiums for rare coin issues. Then layer on the jewel box of history and provenance, and the today value pencils out to something between $1 and $1.5 billion. That's the sober math. The romantic math, what a government, a museum, or a bidding war would pay for intact chests raised on live television, could go higher. But the sea charges interest. For centuries of corrosion can erase timber and bend iron into anonymous shapes. Storms redeposit sand like a thief tidying a crime scene. And every season, new searchers arrive with better tools, convinced the last crew just missed it by a mile. Maybe they did. Or maybe the Merchant Royal lies cracked in a silted trench, its coins strung along the bottom like a comet's tail, glinting for nobody. That is the cruelty here. Value you can calculate, coordinates you cannot. Number 5. The Flor de la Mar. Estimated value, $2 to $3+ billion in treasure. Lost 1511. If the Merchant Royal is a banker's nightmare, the Flor de la Mar is an emperor's. A Portuguese carrack of legendary size and temper. She helped ferry empire across the Indian Ocean during the early 1500s, too big for many harbors, too proud for some captains, and far too important to be trusted in bad weather. In 1511, flush from the seizure of Malacca, Portuguese forces loaded the Flor de la Mar with what chroniclers described in odd shorthand: tribute, taxes, royal gifts, and the spoils of a wealthy trading intrepid where East met West. Think gold by the ton. Sacks of minted coin, ropes of pearls, carved ivories, jade and ruby work, ceremonial regalia, and diplomatic curiosities that would have dazzled the court in Lisbon. The ship never made it home. North of Sumatra, the Flor de la Mar tried to thread rough seas with a hull already known to strain. A storm rose, planks complained. At night in heavy surf, the carrack broke apart on a shoal. Survivors made it to land, the captain among them, while the bulk of the treasure slipped into the Strait of Malacca, where tides run like rivers and the seabed rewrites itself every monsoon. From that night forward, the wreck became less a ship than a magnet. Locals dove by candlelight and legend. Colonial administrators sent surveys. Modern salvage firms have combed the strait with sophisticated gear. The problem isn't desire or technology, it's geology. This is one of the busiest shipping lanes on Earth, shallow in places, fiercely tidal, with soft bottoms that swallow and exhale wreckage over centuries. Even if you locate timbers, you must prove identity, distinguish cargo from centuries of maritime traffic, and then navigate the thorns. National ownership, colonial history, sovereign immunity, and competing claims from every stakeholder who can write a petition. Valuation is an argument, but it starts with mass. Contemporary accounts point to staggering loads, not decorative trifles, but fiscal bullion. Convert reported weights of gold and silver into present prices. Assume only partial accuracy from chroniclers. Subtract generously for exaggeration, and the remainder still sits in the billions. Add the museum-grade artifacts that a royal treasure convoy would have carried: diplomatic gifts, courtly objects, and gemstones, whose size alone would vault them into record books, and the estimate often cited lands around $2 to $3 billion, with informed voices saying that, depending on composition, it could run higher. But numbers understate what was actually lost. The Flor de la Mar carried a moment in time, a ledger of early globalization written in metal and silk, proof of Malacca's cosmopolitan wealth, and a chapter of Portuguese expansion that shaped maps for centuries. To lift intact caskets from that silt would be to open a time capsule from the dawn of the modern world. That is precisely why, paradoxically, success would be complicated. Modern maritime law leans toward cultural patrimony, not cash payouts. The wreck likely falls under the jurisdiction of present-day states whose history includes being on the receiving end of those imperial voyages. Even if a salver found and raised credible cargo, the courtroom voyage would just be beginning. And yet the pull remains. Somewhere beneath brown water whipped by freighters and monsoon squalls, a broken giant sleeps. Divers tell stories of carved fragments glimpsed and then lost as sand avalanches back into place. Fishermen bring up bits of old wood studied with copper nails. Maps get annotated, coordinates hoarded, partnerships brokered and broken. Each season's failure becomes the next season's briefing. It's not greed alone that drives the search. It's the desire to settle a myth with facts, to trade rumor for inventory, to finally match a king's receipt with a hole. If the Merchant Royal is a precision problem, find the right square and dig, then the Flor de la Mar is a patience problem. You must wait for the sea to roll the right card to the top of the deck, to part the sediments just long enough for instruments to see. Until then, the most valuable shipload in Southeast Asian history remains exactly where fate put it. Scattered across a restless strait, priced in billions, and balanced on that sharp edge where history and saltwater agreed to tell no one anything. Number 4. The Treasure of Lima. Estimated value, $1 to $2+ billion. Vanished 1820 start with a city at the edge of an empire and a vault that groaned with centuries of tithes, taxes, and tribute. In 1820, as revolutionary winds tore at Spain's control of South America, colonial officials in Lima, Peru, faced a nightmare. Insurgents were closing in, and the capital's horticulture gold, gem-studded monstrances, candelabra, jeweled icons, royal plate, and chests of minted coin couldn't fall into rebel hands. The solution seemed simple: move everything to safety. They hired the British merchant ship Mary Dear, loaded the treasure under guard, and issued orders to deliver it to Mexico for the crown. Somewhere between loyalty and temptation, the plan unraveled. According to the most repeated version, Captain William Thompson and a conspiratorial slice of his crew murdered the Spanish custodians, sailed west into the Pacific, and hid the cargo among the Cocos Islands today, part of Costa Rica. A green maze of coves and cliffs, perfectly designed for secrets. There the story forks. One line says the pirates were caught, the captain and mate were spared on the promise. They would lead officials back to the cache, and then escaped into the jungle. Another insists the crew scattered with mapped fragments and a pact to reunite. Either way, when searchers returned with armed escorts, they found nothing, just rain in the trees and surf combing the rock. From that absence, a cottage industry was born. In the 19th and 20th centuries, expeditions launched with fervor that bordered on religion. Adventurers scoured the islands, digging in the roots of strangler figs, diving lava shelves, hauling dredges across lagoons. Some swore they found decoys, a few coins under a slab, a trinket in a jar tucked into a cleft, the breadcrumb trail of a clever captain trying to throw pursuers off. Others insisted the treasure had long since been moved to a second, quieter location, another island, or a mainland cave, perhaps inland toward what is now Ecuador. Price it in today's terms and the arithmetic stings. Even after you shave the legends, the mass of bullion and ceremonial works described in contemporary accounts, gold by the ton. Silver by the greater ton takes you well into the billions at current spot prices. Then add premiums. Ecclesiastical masterpieces would command museum-scale valuations. Royal plate with clean colonial provenance can multiply its metal value many times. Gemstones mounted in period settings write their own rules at auction. Factor in the headline premium. The market heat of solving a 2-century riddle in numbers that start around $1 billion plausibly climb north of $2 billion. The law inevitably lurks. Modern maritime and heritage regimes lean toward cultural patrimony rather than private windfalls. Any credible recovery would trigger claims from Peru as the source culture, from Costa Rica as coastal sovereign, and from Spain as imperial successor, along with treaties covering underwater heritage. The courtroom could easily outlast the excavation. But the pursuit has never really been only about cash. The treasure of Lima is a condensation of eras, colonial extractive wealth, revolutionary upheaval, and the modern fascination with closing the loop on a story told in whispers and ink. Somewhere, perhaps under a mat of roots or silt, there may still sit a cedar chest that heard the last Spanish blessing in Lima's vaults, waiting for a shovel, a storm, or a better map. Number 3. Yamashita's gold. Estimated value. Wildly disputed. Tens of billions in legend. Existence debated. If Lima is a ledger you can balance with patience. Yamashita's gold is a rumor that grows compound interest. The claim is simple and explosive. During World War II, as Imperial Japan expanded through Southeast Asia, occupying forces seized vast quantities of treasure bullion, coins, religious statuary, gemstones, and cultural valuables from banks, temples, and private estates across the region. Facing Allied blockades and the risk of interception at sea, High Command allegedly ordered much of this wealth hidden in the Philippines in a network of booby-trap tunnels, caves and underground vault sites engineered with forced labor, sealed with explosives, and mapped for recovery after victory. The name comes from General Tomoyuki Yamashita, the famed Tiger of Malaya, though most versions suggest he inherited the problem rather than designed the system. What happened next depends on whom you ask. One narrative says surrender stranded the caches. The engineers who knew the precise locations died, were executed, or vanished in post-war chaos. Another claims U.S. intelligence discovered portions of the network, secretly recovered gold to underwrite Cold War operations, and buried the truth under classification. A third insists that locals and fortune hunters have been quietly tapping veins of the hoard for decades, selling bars and coins through shadow channels while keeping the best sites dark. Proof is slippery. Court cases have surfaced most. Famously, the Marco Sierra allegations that include affidavits, photos of stamped bars, and dramatic tales of recoveries followed by confiscation. Investigators counter with forensics. Wrong hallmarks. Inconsistent serials, staged digs, and a persistent lack of verifiable, independently documented finds proportional to the legend. Government statements oscillate between polite skepticism and firm denial. The academic consensus tilts toward myth with kernels of truth. Yes, plunder happened. Yes, caches were buried. No, there is no credible evidence for staggering nation-level totals still sitting in the ground. Valuation, therefore, becomes theater.
Advocates
Toss out numbers that would bend global bullion markets $30, $50, even $100, plus billion adding up bank inventories. Temple rumors and Warriora manifests into an irresistible mountain. Realists pare that back hard. Look at reliable seizure records, subtract what was shipped and intercepted, discount duplication and rumor, and you're left with a far smaller, uncertain figure, still enormous, but not the kind of mass that would rewrite economics if unearthed. And yet the magnetism persists because even a fraction of the legend would rank among the largest treasure discoveries in history. The Philippines itself bears the scars of the chase. Jungle hills are pocked with shafts where locals dug by hand, guided by family maps and stories exchanged like heirlooms. Detector coils sweep night fields, backhoes bite riverbanks. Every few years a tale flares, a chamber opened, a cache glimpsed, chest hauled on. Then the details blur into non-disclosure agreements, threats, or anticlimax. Skeptics point out that gold leaks. Sustained silence is rare when many people touch a find. Believers retort that fear, politics, and the promise of a second, even larger chamber keep mouths shut and cameras away. Even if an undeniable trove surfaced tomorrow, documented. Chain of custody cache with assayable bars and wartime provenance, the real weight would land in courts and chancelleries. Claimants would include families and communities from which valuables were taken, religious institutions, the Philippine state as host, and possibly foreign governments tied to the original thefts. Litigating ownership could take a decade. Distributing it fairly might take another. In that sense, Yamashita's gold is the perfect 21st century treasure. Not a chest you break open on a beach, but a global ethics problem wrapped around bullion, which leaves us here. A story with extraordinary financial potential and equally extraordinary uncertainty. Maybe the tunnels hold nothing but stale air and old booby traps. Maybe they cradle a nation's trauma hammered into bars. Maybe both can be true. Some finds real, the rest wishful embroidery. Legends thrive where accounting fails, and this legend thrives because it speaks to something bigger than ounces and price charts. The way war scrambles value, hides it, and dares the future to find it again. The San Galleon estimates from $4 billion to $17 plus billion. Found but still effectively lost, a floating treasury sailed into legend. On June 8, 1708, the Spanish galleon San, flagship of the South Sea Fleet, was stuffed with colonial wealth bound from Cartagena to gold and silver bullion from Peru and New Granada, millions of minted coins, and crates of emeralds bright as bottled jungle. Off-island, British warships intercepted the convoy. Cannon thundered, powder flashed, and then the night tore open. The San S powder magazine exploded, pitching the ship and most of her crew into deep water. The treasure didn't scatter across beaches for scavengers. It plunged straight into the cold, black Caribbean, sealed away by weight, depth, and time. For centuries, the sand was a rumor in logbooks and a calculation in investors' daydreams. Then, in 2015, Colombia announced a discovery. Images from a deep ocean vehicle showed bronze, cannon with distinctive dolphins and a wreck strewn with timbers, ceramics, and long silent guns compelling markers that the flagship had been located. Coordinates remain a state secret. Sovereignty claims ignited instantly. Spain as the former imperial owner, Colombia as coastal sovereign. Indigenous, Peruvian, and Panamanian voices invoking the origin of the mined wealth. And a private salvage firm citing prior search work. Museums argued for public stewardship. Treasure outfits pointed to risk, cost, and reward. Meanwhile, the wreck sleeps, watched by currents and law. How much is down there? The honest answer is, we don't know exactly. But the paper trail is rich, and contemporary manifests describe astonishing bulk, hundreds of tons of bullion and coin. Translate historical weights conservatively to modern ounces, apply spot prices, then add numismatic premiums for rare issues. Emerald valuations for high clarity, Colombian stones. And the once-in-a-century headline premium of a documented royal treasure, and you land in a range that regularly gets cited between $4 billion and north of $17 billion. Even the cautious end of that spectrum would make the San the most valuable shipwreck cargo ever identified. Yet money is the simplest part of this story. The galleon is also a time capsule from the first wave of global financing guts, stamped in colonial foundries. Coin dies that traveled across oceans, emerald chains destined for European courts. Recovering it isn't just a technical puzzle. It is a cultural and legal crucible. Who owns history extracted under empire? Who curates it? Who benefits? Until those questions are settled and funded. Conservation grade plan proceeds. The San remains paradoxically both found and lost. Discovered in principle, it's unreachable in practice, and still the most expensive silence on the Caribbean seafloor. Number 1. The Lost Inca Ransom Langonates Hoard. Legends that pencil to tens of billions, existence unproven but irresistible. The most expensive object ever lost might not be a single artifact at all, but a room full of gold multiplied by the mountains. In 1532, Conquistador Francisco Pizarro captured the Inca Emperor Atahualpa at Cajamarca and named the price for his life. Fill one large room once with gold and twice with silver, up to a line on the wall. Couriers fanned across the Andes. From temples and palaces came hammered sundisks, ritual cups, jaguar-faced masks, and sheets of beaten gold peeled from sacred walls. The ransom room filled, and the Spanish melted much of it down into transportable bars. Despite payment, Atahualpa was executed. Here the trail splits. One stream of chronicles insists a second. Even larger convoy was en route when news of the emperor's death reached Inca General Ruminahui. Facing betrayal and pursuit, he is said to have diverted the treasure into Ecuador's Langonates. Mountains a-weather, twisted labyrinth of bog. Cloud, forest, and cliff sand hid it beyond recovery collapsing paths, behind porters and sealing caches and caves with rock falls and fire. For 5 centuries, maps and clues have surfaced like mirages. The Duratero de Valverde, a friar's alleged trail notes, coordinates traded in whispers, accounts of glints and ravines and chambers glimpsed behind tumbled stone. Expeditions Victorian, academic, and modern have all come back with the same prize: stories. Skeptics point to hard math. Enormous convoys leave archaeology broken, strapping, camp waste, human remains, metal scatters. The Langonates are punishing but not infinite. Why no decisive finds? Believers counter with equally hard realities. The Inca were masters of logistics and concealment. Spanish accounts undercount what was destroyed or hidden. Modern surveys cover narrow corridors in a region the weather redraws every season. And gold is patient. A single landslide can bury a temple forever. Valuation lives on a knife edge between documented ransom and rumored reserve. Start with what we do know. The first room's haul melted and minted, represented an almost unthinkable concentration of precious metal for the 16th century. Price an equivalent mass at today's spot rates, and you are instantly in multi-billion territory, before cultural premiums. Now imagine that the shadow convoy existed, and that it wasn't just scrap metal, but high art, sun discs, 2 arm spans, wide life-size ritual figures, court objects driven to astonishing thinness by Inca metallurgists. The metal alone would be worth staggering sums. The artistic and historical premium would be a second mountain range stacked on top. Responsible historians refuse to stamp a firm number on a hoard we cannot verify. But even a fraction of the legend could push into the tens of billions at modern prices and museum-grade valuations. Beyond numbers, the ransom is a moral weather vane. It concentrates questions that still echo. How conquest prices life. How wealth moves from shrine to furnace to ledger. How memory tries to hide what brute force cannot protect. Every generation returns to the Langonates with better gear and worse patience. LiDAR maps ridge lines in laser, drones nose into ravines. Geochemists sniff for anomalies in streams. Then the clouds roll in, and the mountain says not today. Perhaps the greatest treasure is not a chamber at all, but a ledger of outcomes. Sometimes the conqueror loses the thing he most wants forever. If you like this video, tap like, share it with a friend, and subscribe for more jaw-dropping top 10s every week. Which lost fortune should we cover next? King John's jewels in the wash, the Florentine diamond, or Ireland's crown jewels? Drop your pick in the comments.